pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Approval of minutes is the next item on our agenda.
Motion to approve. Second.
Second. Any additions, deletions, or corrections? Hearing none, all in favor say aye. Opposed say nay. Streetcar performance report, Mr. Coates.
Sir.
Good afternoon. We provided 99.9% of the 2193 trips from the month of August with an on-time performance rating of 99.9 also. There was one accident during the month of August, on August 13th. On Morgan Street, a private vehicle attempting to make a right onto Old Water Street did not yield to the streetcar traveling north on the waters. Contact was made. There were no injuries, minimal damage to the streetcar, but extensive damage to the front end of the private vehicle. Private vehicle was cited for failure to yield. There was one special service during the month on August 9th. We took the Blau Thomason wedding party going to and from the yacht Starship. On August 20th, there was a total of 3 cars for an additional 6 hours of extra service were required to move the Shriners up from the convention center to the parade here in Ybor City. Convention is accounted for 5.4% of the overall patronage with 1,225 rides. All the trackway and interlocking reports are all done. All inspections were completed as scheduled. There were 14 wheelchair boardings during the course of the month with no problems. And 12 preventive maintenance, 8 preventive maintenance were performed.
Any questions?
Questions?
Curious report, only that, I think we told you we were going to be invited to the support staff. Catherine and I did that. They were very pleasant. Just to come to the September meeting, but they're out of town, so they asked to be in October meeting. Presentation. The staff probably will not. Hi.
Hi, Daryl Mack here. Mr. Schloss, I apologize for my tardiness.
Oh, you're all fine, thank you.
Whatever.
Yeah. So we'll do that in October and asking for, they advise that we ask for $100,000. So that's why we're going to ask for it. And I think we still have to do a board, some of those board members so we'll be ready for that. And that occurs just before we start our council board. The Tampa City Council approved a special assessment for another year, and that's going to be on $50,000, so that's good. I think
We have a couple of update items. Is Michael Stevens in the audience? Or is Michael like to step away? Well, we'll come back today. Steve Rosenstock. Steve, do you have any information to share with us on item D?
Sure. After the marketing committee, last time that we met, there was a question that arose as to why don't we do something like creative local events like CL deals and or Groupons. And in looking into their business model is basically a 50% or so discount off of regular rate. So first of all, if we had a $5 one-way all-day ticket, it would be discounted to $2.50. So that's what they require. And then the business model is such that they get 50% of what's left. So we, THS would be getting $1.25, Creative Loafing and or Groupons would get $1.25. And also, they would also have to determine how many tickets they would want you to sell in terms of to make enough money for them to go ahead and advertise it. So I just wanted to get that as far as what the discounts are.
And it is, Well, and the other issue that Steve clarified was the tracking of the Groupon, since folks spent them out individually. The issue is if someone were to buy a Groupon for Streetcar Pass, they couldn't just present it to a motorman. The motorman would have to verify that. So then we'd be asking them to drive it here, and Danielle could go call them in, which defeats the convenience factor. So there were a bunch of reasons it seemed a little less attractive as we dug into it.
Did you have a number?
That's it on the Groupon.
Yeah.
And then on, thank you, Steve. And then on the request that came up from our marketing committee was to build an app. We talked to the IT guys and they said, oh my goodness, we're looking for some information. But we wanted to make sure we were clarifying. We were explaining to them what the group was looking for. So you'd be looking for an app that would include the schedule information, how to purchase a fare, which we don't currently have online. The question was, is the Streetcar Board looking just for an app that does what a limited function that the website currently does? Or were you thinking about something that would require an update to a mobile website so you would be able to buy fare media online? What is it you're looking for this app to deliver? And based on that, we can start figuring out how much something like that costs.
Well, not being the app expert, I would think that we would want to eventually get to the all of the above stage, but probably initially something where a person can use their phone, find out what the schedule is, where to buy passes, things like that, initially. But then expand into other services and things that make sense. You know, for instance, maybe some of the promotional items would be available, maybe a button of events that you click there and see what's happening with the streetcar. And it could be a mobile version of the website too, where it's easier for people to manipulate it on their phones.
Okay, so we'll start off with, I mean, I couldn't tell you the last time we touched the Streetcar website, but I think if you look at it, it looks like have we ever touched the Streetcar website?
That's just, it was good to go.
I think it had board members. I think to change board member names, I think that's when it's
Okay,
touched.
so it's essentially 2002 technology, and it looks like it. So I'm going to go ahead and guess that if we have an app that builds off of a website, there's it'd probably be easier to create a new website. You just logged on, didn't you?
I did, I absolutely did.
It is,
Yeah,
sorry about
it's
that.
just- My recent experience with this tells me that, an old website isn't going to convert to mobile website. So if you rebuild the website, you can use various programming languages that'll make it mobile friendly almost immediately. Barring that, it's probably better. I understand. Which is not for the people at the town. But the reality is, if I want to buy a streetcar right now, I'm probably going to try to figure out how. I'm not on my computer very often, so being able to do it on mobile device does seem like something fairly important in success, right?
So we'll use some discretion with the board's approval of saying what we think, what it's, an app that's on how to write it. So where is it, so schedule information, sales outlet information, so on and so forth. So based on those criteria, we'll fill in the blanks the best we can, start getting some price tags.
We have no opportunity for a transaction at this point. We have no opportunity for a transaction.
Not yet, no, but when Jeff joins us, he will talk a little bit more about what's going on.
We have to do the fare box upgrade and all that.
We're actually doing readers, which will be separate from the fare boxes to start with, so the streetcars will have readers, that everything can be on the phone. And I know that we're very excited about Apple Watch, but a point to bear in mind, the near-field communications that Apple Watch uses, Android has been using since 2012, and any fare box we purchase will be using the near-field communications. So once we get the scanning unit to sort of a bolt-on until we get to complete replacement, we'll have the ability to do that. And the intent is to roll it out immediately with streetcar passes and fair media in there. So that's something which HART is doing, but we'll still get together on what the streetcar app by itself would look like. And then separately, I've got a couple of contacts I've made through. One is from the Saturday Morning Breakfast Group in East Tampa. They have a couple of older comp sci professionals, retirees, who do internships, and they do projects with high school kids and junior high kids. And things that they look for are, hey, is there a website I can fix? And I said, there might be. So I will be meeting with the program coordinator to see what kind of projects they look for and get some examples of the works the kids have done. And then I think that's an option. And if somebody can get a good grade and Streetcar can get a website, I mean, honestly, kids I'm talking to are younger than the website.
They probably would be more interested in building an app too.
Yeah, it is, right? So let's see what get to the young ones, as it were.
Yeah, no, I think that's great, but I think at a base level, I was part of it. At the base level, I gotta be able to, wherever I am, figure out if I'm gonna be able to catch a streetcar, right? And then from there, obviously, then you go.
Well, and we've had students from USF, for instance, in the hackathons go in and screen out the Google Transit feed, which includes all that streetcar information. So the data exists in open source that kids can get to and grab and go. And remember, your on-time performance is over 99%. So a combination of schedule information plus tapping into the HART live alert system, they would push out, hey, streetcar got beamed by a car or something else happening. That will definitely meet the needs of knowing the streetcar showing up, except for gas level, of course, and that's just rain for rain, but. So we'll be bringing back an update. It seems like that student group has the ability to do some of these things. And then hopefully someday an app that's the streetcar. So that's what I have for the app on social media. And then
Rick had something.
yes.
The other part is the boarding locations, and I just got out of a 2.5-hour meeting about apps, so I'm fresh on my mind. Okay. And they have something, and I'm going to take you, but either through the Wi-Fi, through GPS system, or through something that's called a beacon that you can put on the stations. And when you get within 70 to 100 meters of the station, it'll pop up and say, this is the fares, and this is the schedule, and all that kind of stuff, which is sort of unique technology we're looking at the convention center, so pretty neat stuff.
We may be able, part of the groundwork for that might exist also in the Google feed because it's got the hard coded locations lat long stations, so that sounds that'd be something cool to add to the list. Great. And the final thing that I had is I met with the aquarium staff on Friday. So that was a really, really positive meeting and a lot of conversations. The aquarium folks definitely feel strongly the streetcar as an attraction, separate from not just a method of transportation, but more of an attraction feeding into it. So a lot of good conversations about where does the community see the streetcar going as a ribbon to pull together attractions. I think we'll get good information from the HDO presentation, can help us see what are options for the streetcar. But there were very simple questions like if there is a group of kids going to a birthday party, can you just stop the streetcar in front of the aquarium? And of course I said no, and they said why not? And I said because, and I said oh my God, my mother. So we'll be looking into why you can do that in New Orleans but not here. They have used temporary platforms before, so we said, hey, you know what? You think about what it is that you want. Are you looking for a station to be a location? Because of course I asked San Diego Ray flying over a station. They thought I was crazy, and that's all right. But just trying to get a sense of what would be successful for the aquarium and pulling these attractions together, generating a sense of location. They are interested in being not just a concession location. I had some conversations I committed to go back to the board, thinking about deals like could the board authorize a sort of promo, show your receipt, and that turns into ride for free from more locations or the aquarium. What would you like your staff to look at to bring back? Is it ride for free with the parking garage receipt? Because clearly if you need to take the streetcar to get to the aquarium in the first place, you have no receipt to get your free ride. So it's not sufficient to say to the owner, but my kid looks like he wants to go see a shark. That's not going to work. So would you be willing to let us come up with some ideas, bring them back to marketing committee, bring them forward in ways that not just being a sales concession, but sort of a package deal, show you receipt, do this. We have to find out what we can code off our fare box as well, so we can see how concrete we are, where we're coming from and where we're going to. Is this something this board would like us to pursue?
Sure.
No, I was just going to say, after we conclude this discussion, I'm going to get the legal comments on the record.
So we will continue meeting with aquarium staff and try to put together a pilot or so to bring back. I just think there's they have just obviously a much larger marketing budget, and their marketing universe and marketing focus both are just fundamentally different from what ours are. And we can tap into that synergy and get some ridership, but also some different ways to think about how the streetcar ties in and what role it plays in the expansion of what's going on. That can be very beneficial for us as well. But they were very positive. They really like the streetcar and they want to use it more.
Anybody been in touch with this?
We have, is it the van group? So Bob McDonald's been.
Yeah,
Hmm?
hammering this.
Hammering.
As well as the court, but, yeah.
Great, thank you. And the aquarium also offered to, I mean, a lot of folks are offering to facilitate introductions, but if we have 14 people trying to introduce us to 27 folks who claim to speak to one person, we have a lot of opportunities to bark up the wrong tree.
Oh, I think we rely on Mr. McDonough over there. Just based on what I heard, so it's really,
Well, you know, it's interesting, like everybody else, yeah, you should really expand the hours. So we should really get some money.
Sure.
Yeah.
So, that group, and again, from the Rose conversation, they're very focused on making that, you know, that entire town side area destination, a very urban style environment. So, yes, the mayor probably has a fair bit of pull and potentially has his here, but he also does, he has to represent about 15 or 20 different interests. Sure. I might just throw out there as a suggestion, the idea that maybe one of our top people representing Streetcar, the CEO, you know, put in a call or send an email and say, look, we're here, we're trying to figure out how to make the streetcar relevant. We're here to help you solve your problems in traffic, you know, whatever we can do to help you move traffic, put together an environment. We'd love to do that. You know, please reach out to us at any time. So send, you know, directly to Smith. You can get his email address like that. And, you know, just at least get that dialogue going and say, we're here to help. Because he's redesigning, they're redesigning so many different aspects right now, channel set traffic flow, and everything else. They're trying to put an obstacle with this, that, and so I think, you know, just again, and, you know, offering to help, right, the posture of offering to help.
I think the board has to tell me what to do, because otherwise I'd be out calling it.
And that's only a suggestion for one
So,
board.
okay.
Well, what do the rest of y'all think?
I don't want to have people stumbling over each other.
I meet with them twice a week. They're asking for money. So I have an entree, which is why I'm using it. They're asking for a lot of money, and a lot of colors. So there's the public persona and then there's the reality. So,
Understood.
yeah.
Probably for the moment, I don't know how the rest of you all feel, but it's a good suggestion. You're obviously able to do that at a professional level. I think our board, and even Catherine probably should just sit tight until we see how this unfolds a little bit. And I know there's a lot of discussion about redoing street systems and street purposing that. We're doing a lot of things that will affect us at some point. So I guess I'd be comfortable relying on Bob for the moment, but it's really up to you all. Again, I haven't been party to, you know, I prefer to stay with that. So, I mean, at the end of the day, I just posture what we can do to help, and if he asks for money, just say how much you want. And, you know, that it's a meeting dialogue, right? I mean,
Oh, I have lots of dialogue. Lots and lots of dialogue. Yeah. Their request for public support is strong, which is why I feel that I have the ability and right to say, well, you know, you want the streetcar to have a more robust operating hours, then, you know, you need help. So,
Okay, so I guess we'll stay in the hold for the moment on that. Before we move on to the agenda, I assume you don't have a legal or legislative report, except I hope that Mr. Schlosser's condition is improved.
Well, and the reason I did not mean to interrupt you, the reason I wanted to carve a little bit is I do have a short report
Oh, sure.
requested by Mr. Slauson that I get today, give to you
Go right
recently, today. He is doing much better. He's in several days a week. He has his updates nowadays. Today wasn't really feeling as well today, so it's a precautionary measure, and then it is coming into work a few days a week now. So we're trending up with him, and that's great. His advice just briefly was that as far as replacement insurance related to CSX. They're just starting now, looking sort of sooner rather than later. Because it kind of, I guess last year, he said it kind of crept up, or the issue came to the light a little late, and wasn't able to be corrected to your satisfaction. And then also, he is working, he never got copies of the policies from last year. He's working to get those, so he can check them against the current CSX agreement. And he's going to have that ready for you next time before you get those.
Good. All good.
So we're working on that, but I just wanted to convey that.
Thank you so much. Any questions, Mr. Schlosser? Before you move on, I'm sorry, Captain.
And I apologize, I left off. We have been able to schedule a meeting with State Secretary of Transportation for SOD next week over at the Transportation Forum happening in St. Petersburg. So we will be speaking with him next week to try to get the ball rolling a little farther on what's going on a state level, what we can anticipate from CSX. Given, of course, that there's a gubernatorial election coming up, we'll lay as much groundwork as we can, but just being cognizant that we might have a fantastic meeting this month and need a great new meeting in November. But we are meeting with the secretary and trying to get the groundwork laid out. And also talking to the members of our delegation so they can, if need be, weigh in Tallahassee, that there are good reasons to help us out down in Tampa.
Good, excellent. Good, thank you. I just wanted to mention, because we talked about how old our website is, if we get money from the Port Road, like the marketing committee, would consider spending a small portion of that on a new website. I think for what we need, it can't cost more than $10,000, and I know that to be true. And we have a terrible website, and it could very easily be updated with more modern technology, so it's much more accessible, easy to use, and easy to put things on a regular basis. So I'd like that to be a subject of discussion. The market committee, hopefully we can talk about it next month.
And let us share the documentation that we can. HART has recently, I want to say in the past few months, made the board do a review of the website for us. So we have very fresh information on what cost is going out there, what functionalities are on. So I think we should have some information to be pretty helpful.
Committee reports. I don't think the marketing committee is met. Amazon Smile.
Mr. President, board members, good to see you. My name is Lee Hostetler. I'm the City of Tampa's Chief Accountant. So I believe the president got a letter from Amazon, and it says something like if people buy things from Amazon, that they'll give us the charity of your choice 5%. And so I got that email from Giselle or somebody, and the first thing I noticed when I read it was, send us your bank account number. So we've been indoctrinated at the City of Tampa that anything that asks for your bank account number must be phishing, and so my knee-jerk reaction was, this is phishing, I don't want anything to do with it. So I sent it over to our T&I group, and they said, no, Lee, it's not phishing, it's legit. There is an Amazon program where you can sign up your charity, and if you purchase things, they'll indeed send you a check. So when I heard that, then I had to take it seriously. So I made some notes here. First thing, if we were to do this, we would have to set up the inbound traffic over in the city's accounting system. We would have to put processes in place. We would have to make sure the bank knows. We wouldn't want this just to be a free-for-all for money to go in and out of the city's account. So when I thought about that, I thought about the cost, it's 5.5 cents for an inbound item. And thought about, well, how much are we going to get? How much do people usually buy on Amazon? How much money is the Streetcar going to get? My knee-jerk reaction says, no, the cost of doing this, my time, which is very expensive, I'm kidding, versus the benefit of
moderately expensive.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. Versus if we get 27 cents or $5 a quarter, is it really worth it going through all this? But long and short of that is we could probably do this if you said it must be done. So then I went ahead and went onto the site, and I clicked the different things that, like the agreement, And so I think that the attorneys, if we are going to do this, should read the agreements, because there's a lot of language in there that says if you're going to do this, then you will do all these other things as well. So I was a little anxious when I started reading that. I thought, let's just send it to Dick and let him handle it. But I also wrote down here, if folks want to give to the streetcar, isn't there a better way than going on Amazon and getting a nickel per purchase? You know, if you want to give us the money, just give us the money. I was also wondering about, is this just a Amazon way of doing business, you know, marketing or whatever? So when they sent the letter to the president, it said something like one or more of our customers has indicated that they want to contribute to the streetcar. But when I read the fine print, actually, they use a guide star, and it goes and gets all of the charities that are signed up, you know, with the IRS. So I don't know if it was out of the largesse of some customer that said, oh yeah, the streetcar, or they would just had the streetcar on their list of charities and they sent everybody a letter. So I also wrote down here, if we indeed were to allow Amazon to do this, then does that mean we have to open it up to any company that says, well, gee, if you're going to let Amazon give you money, then we should be able to give you money too. So those are the kinds of things that I saw. But then I read there that it says to be eligible, you cannot be a supporting organization. Well, the streetcar is a supporting organization. At least that's what we put on the tax return. I'm not sure exactly what that meant, unless it's that you support maybe the city government or the HART government in some form or fashion. So when I read that again, I thought, I got to talk to the attorney. What does that mean? Because there was also some other language there that said you can be a supporting organization if you're a tier 1 or a tier 2 or an exemption 3 or blah, blah, blah. And I thought, call the attorney. So those are my notes. We would have to read the participation agreement. We would have to think about whether it's really worth it. And I think that's everything.
Thank you. Any questions? I think earning income by the nickel through Amazon is probably a lot more work.
I know a couple charities that sign up for that, send you a find out how much money they make. It's actually not that, it's actually pretty clever for what you do. It's just like, this is my charity to use on every kind of work. And you got to like my house on, you know. And you got
Well,
to
that's true.
but who's gonna, you know, you gotta pick like a streetcar over the Humane Society, which, but I'll let you know when I hear how much they make. I mean, if it's a few $100, it's one thing, but if they're pulling in, you know, $5,000 or $10,000, it's not.
Okay. Why don't we defer this to the marketing committee agenda? If you figure anything out, that would be great. If Dick has a few minutes to check out the Amazon website or Amazon Smile, and we'll let you know what we think next month.
Okay.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
And for the investigation.
Can you email that link? Could you email me that link to that site that you'd like for us to review?
Yes, sir. Well, it's in Dick's email,
Oh, it is? Okay.
but I'll get your card too.
Okay.
Okay, next item, Lori Gage report.
It seems whenever Lori isn't here, I have good news. Maybe we should keep her away. Lori just wanted to write, I'm so sorry I won't be able to make the meetings today. I have a follow-up meeting with a potentially great advertising opportunity with conflicts. So hopefully it's really great, and we're going to hold her to that. But also, coming out of the meeting with the Lightning, the Lightning actually is interested in wrapping 2 streetcars for the end of the year, in October and November. As a result, it's going to be about $5,000 worth of trade, but it will be an extra $3,000 to the streetcar. These are 2 streetcars that are currently in wrap. They've also indicated that they're interested in wrapping streetcars all year round. And these aren't just the Lightning people, and then I hope I get this right, Emily Oil Arena. Okay, I didn't botch up the name, but the Emily Arena people are the ones that are driving this, and everybody's email address has changed to that now. So it could be something long-term with them. So they've indicated that they are interested, but right now they're interested right now. for the Lightning, just the two, but they have indicated that the arena people might do something that Anheuser-Busch has done. For example, Anheuser-Busch has partners with the Bucks, and you've seen it on the streetcar as far as the ads that they put on in the wraps. And they're thinking of possibly doing the same with Budweiser and or some of the other partners that they have, and that would be an all-year-round program. So one of the Lightning people are very interested. They have already put through a contract through the end of the year for the 2F streetcar and the $5,000 worth of trade, which would also include ads in their programs, as well as tickets and or whatever, anything. We haven't worked out the details yet that we would use for streetcar promotions.
Okay, great. Thank you. Any questions?
And the other one is coming from the Florida Aquarium. The Florida Aquarium did send Lori a letter that they are interested in a wrapping streetcar. So they're just going through how much does it cost, and can you let me know, and this comes straight from Scott Rose, can you please let me know the cost for wrapping a streetcar like Budweiser has done? So that could be something also.
And when did the aquarium reach out to Lori? Or when did Lori reach out to the aquarium?
It was through, you gave me the number, I gave it to.
That was fast.
Yeah, I gave it, so
Fantastic.
it's Miss Catherine.
It was with Lori.
So, yeah, so again, Lori, new business, and let's keep her away as much as we can so that I can keep reporting on the revenue. Right? See?
I would be interested in knowing more detail about the $5,000 in trade. And I agreed to that last week. I'm not going to be very second about doing it for all of next year. I'd really like to see the pay what it costs. Just so we
Yeah, part of the next year will not be trade.
Good.
They just wanted to do, we're not looking at trades, we're looking at the full amount.
That's good. That's great.
Okay.
Now that Michael is back, if the board's approval, we'll go back to update all the documents necessary for the bar charters. Do we have more information on that, Michael?
I do. Good afternoon, Michael Stevens, Chief Business Enterprise and Safety Officer for HART. We went back and looked at some comparators for the discussion that we had before with respect to bar service being on charter streetcars. And specifically went to see who else was doing it out there. We looked at the River Rail system, which is in Little Rock, Arkansas. Of course, we looked in San Francisco, and we looked at New Orleans. And all of them, of course, offer some charter service. Interestingly enough, though, out of the three, the Big Easy, it's not that big or easy to get booze on the streetcars. They don't provide for alcohol service on their charters. And when we went to look at the documents, so we can kind of, not necessarily reinvent the wheel, since we had at some point in time offered it here, we couldn't really find those legacy documents for our system, but we went to look at some comparators. For example, River Rail has a very simple provision in which essentially has blanket indemnification language, or blanket, I should say, hold harmless language. What we would recommend and propose in our own chartering contract would be similar language, which would provide for hold harmless for the entity that charters the streetcar, and then some indemnification language to buttress that up to make sure that if anything happens, anyone who would potentially come after the streetcar or come after HART, that brunt of responsibility would be taken on by the chartering entity. What we will do is we will begin to at least do a rough draft of some language and maybe an agreement, a charter agreement. We'll pass it over to Dick's office for them to take a look at it and for them to circulate it appropriately, and then we can go from there.
Excellent. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Okay. Now we have the pleasure of hearing Mr. Stephen Sheegrass, who's a consultant with HDM, who's done a study for HART, which I'm going to Stephen about to introduce.
Thank you very much. We've spoken the past few years, can tell you so much has changed in the downtown channel side. We can't go forward presuming that what we had in the pocket for plans is accurate. So HART put out a solicitation and ended up working with HDR to look at where the streetcar is today and what is involved, in extending it, now that's sort of a broad term. If you take the streetcar to the transit center, which are your opportunities, what are the pluses, what are the minuses? We'd also ask about looking at some fleet modifications, and what's the status of what we've got on rails, where do we go from there? Just so when we as a community are having these broad conversations about what role the rail line we operate plays, we have fresher information. Does that sound about right?
That sounds perfect.
Okay, so then, so nice to meet you, and take it away.
Thank you. I didn't inquire as to my time budget, so this can go obviously as long as you need it to, but the presentation is fairly brief.
10 or 15 minutes.
Okay. The scope of services that we developed with HART is fairly straightforward. It has really two parts to it. One is to look at the extension from somewhere along the existing line, not necessarily the terminus of the existing line, but from the existing line to the Maryland Transit Center, with the idea that when you get to the north end of downtown, you're also accessing the footprint of the potential future intermodal hub, which could serve all sorts of transit, regional intercity transit service. And then look at also the existing line and start to define what it would take to upgrade the existing line to support different vehicles. So if a modern streetcar, then there are different forms of modern streetcar, but if a typical modern streetcar vehicle was to be introduced on the line, what would it take to support that on all or part of the existing line? So it's a very straightforward study. It's also not an alternatives analysis that will be required for FTA or once HART entered an FTA process. So this is a high-level conceptual analysis of the alternatives to look at what's promising and to try to focus our resources in on a couple of those questions that have been kind of, for lack of a better term, floating around for a while, so we can help either resolve a question or clarify what needs to be tackled in a future phase of study. We're also going to put some preliminary costs to both the extension and the upgrade of the existing system based on HDR's and our subconsultant LTK Engineering's experience on systems around the country. So we have a significant streetcar practice. We have a large transit group, but we also do planning, design, program management for streetcar systems around the country. We're currently, as a sort of close to local example, we're currently working on the Wave streetcar as the program manager, guiding them through the FTA process, their local agreement process to make sure all the partners, and there's many partners in that process, are at the table and agree to their commitment to both the initial construction but also long-term operations. LTK is a transit engineering company that I believe is responsible for something like 80 to 9% of the transit vehicle purchases in the country over the last 10 years. So they have their pulse on the value of existing rolling stock and also on new equipment and the variety of new equipment available for U.S. systems. So we'll be tapping their expertise to help inform both thinking about the extension and the upgrade, but also looking at the cost for the pieces of each of those. The upgrade is to an extent, it's a fairly straightforward process to assess what it would take to introduce modern streetcar to all or part of the existing system. So it's to look at the vehicle cost to purchase new rolling stock, to look at the track geometry, which is one of the primary physical constraints. You've got several 50-foot radius turns in your horizontal curves, which would need to be smoothed down a bit to get larger vehicles. There are modern streetcars that run with a 50-foot radius turn, but they're not Buy America compliant vehicles, at least not right now. The typical turning radius is more like in the mid 66 feet and up. There's also some question and some thinking about introducing larger light rail vehicles on all or portion of the existing system or on an extension. So we would also look at an even larger turning radius to see if that was possible. So we would look at some level of interoperability with modern streetcar and light rail vehicles on the same system. The traction power, there would have to be additional capacity to support the extension, but we'd also have to do some upgrades to the existing traction power system if new vehicles were introduced. Both the power source and also the lines that the vehicles are attached to, and one can put some numbers to that. The maintenance building capacity is also a question. Turning larger vehicles, getting them here and getting them over the bays for service is a challenge. So we would also be looking at very quickly at the building's capacity for extension, for an addition, to see if we could house and maintain new vehicles. So we're looking at that. That's one set of exercises that we're starting our research into that now. We're pulling together information from other systems, and we're starting to look at what's appropriate. So that, we don't have anything specific to report on that yet. It's all possible to bring new vehicles onto the whole system. It's just all a matter of money, how much it's going to take to make that happen. When I pull up the slides in a second about the extension, though, the one thing to think about is this system could operate a handful of the existing vehicles as well as modern streetcars and have interoperability in that way too. So that's another factor to consider. For the extension, again, this isn't an engineering analysis of what's possible. It's a planning analysis. It's fairly conceptual level assessment, but the things that we're looking at are very basic questions that you ask when you think about any sort of transit improvement. Specifically, what's our destination access? What are we trying to get to, and what kind of ridership might that generate? So we're not going to do a detailed ridership analysis, but piercing the heart of downtown and getting to the Marion Transit Center provides the potential to access all the stuff that's on the ground now is proposed, and and there's almost a daily report about a new project downtown. And if the market holds for a few more years, we'll see that start to happen, and things will really change dramatically. The mode connections, connecting if historic streetcar runs and we're connecting a modern streetcar that extends the Marion Transit Center and beyond where that connection occurs. Also the mode transfer from streetcar to circulator to bus is important. So the Marion Transit Center, we can get either to Marion Transit Center or near Marion Transit Center, and that's one of the questions that we'll think about as we go through the extensions. The way to get the most capacity out of the streetcar line is to double track it the whole way so cars don't have to queue to pass. One of your limits now in running highly frequent service is the mix of single track and double track. So we'd be looking at the extensions as, our first goal is to look at those extensions as all double track, whether that's a pair or on a single street, and that's what we're trying to see if we can work. So we're looking at laying out tracks and existing rights of way and existing curb lines that seem well fit. So that's part of the exercise that we're going through. The potential for extension beyond this first phase or second phase extension, we have the first phase extension complete, to go west to the intermodal center of West Shore, to go north on Florida or another way, or to loop back to Ybor, is that doesn't have to drive all of our thinking about an extension to Marion Transit Center, because making a turn off of an existing line is not that complicated. It'll become more complicated when we, in a future phase of study, when we need to think about the sort of operational scenario. How far do these cars run the whole route? Do they run part of the route? Do they loop back while another one extends further? Those are questions about operations that we won't resolve. We'll address, again, at a high level, conceptual level, but we won't resolve in the study, but they'll be important. But we are looking at what kinds of extensions have been mapped in the past, so we understand where those cutoff points would occur. The effect on existing transit operations really comes into play at the Marion Transit Center footprint, which is I don't know if you're at maximum capacity, but you've got to be close in terms of the number of buses you have queuing in and out, the limited number of bays, and also on Marion Transitway. If streetcars introduced to Marion Transitway, how does that affect bus operations on the Transitway? And then there's the traffic and utility impacts that we will get some initial feedback from the city, from DOT about different alignments and their concern about operations. One of the things that can help solve that if it moves forward is the county's, one of the items on the Transportation for Economic Development list of potential investments is to upgrade the downtown signalization system. So it's a more modern, sophisticated system, so transit priority and other priorities can be adjusted through the course of the day based on traffic flow and managed more accurately. So that's one of the things that could solve a lot of concerns about streetcar running in mixed traffic or exclusive lanes. But regardless of how it runs, it could solve the question about what the impact is on congestion. So these 2 points, and I just pull this up for a second because that light blue haze circles show a quarter-mile distance from the end of the existing line in the Marion Transit Center. And you can see that we've got a big gap in the middle, and in that gap is a lot of valuable real estate, a lot of existing development, a lot of development potential. So it's clearly we're not well served with those 2 major points of transit service right now, and that's one of the things that an extension would address. The extension has been on the books for a long time, or different sorts of extensions have been on the books for a long time. So back in 2002, 2004 period, there was discussions about phase 2, 3, 4 extensions. What was mapped at the time was a route that went from the Dick Ricker Plaza north along Franklin as a straight shot with the potential to cut off to the west. And you can see this is a crossing at Cass. There's a small little, it's very difficult to see on this map, not terribly important for the presentation. But at that point, the idea of the western route was across west on Cass, and then north to Tyler with an idea of actually a route that would cut and go straight to the front door of the Strass Center, and then head north closer to the river, and then ultimately getting north to Palm, and then circling east along Palm back to Ybor City and connecting to the end of the existing line. So the loop has been one of those extensions that has been on the table for a long time to close that loop. At the 2004 period of time, there was also a study done that looked at other routes. So there was a look at from west to east, Ashley, Tampa, Franklin, Florida, and Marion as potential north-south routes with different ways to get to Marion Transit Center and then move beyond. And that study focused a lot on traffic impacts, on impacts on existing developments. It looked at the differences in utility impacts across those different streets. So we're reviewing the reports from then as part of our input to think about what looks promising now. And then most recently, the MPO, Hillsborough MPO did a study, the Transit Assets and Opportunities study that looked at all different sorts of rail configurations, fixed guideway rail configurations that went through downtown and connected elsewhere in the region. And the way they did it is they looked at, in the downtown location, a whole series of segments and assessed the potential of those segments in terms of their impacts and costs, and stitched them together into, I think it was 8 alternatives. They boiled those down to a short list, and that report is in draft form now. So I have a meeting actually tomorrow with Rich Clarendon for him to go over with us how they developed the alternatives, what their thinking was about how a streetcar extension related to other sorts of rail extensions.
And our board has seen that presentation.
Okay. So what I'm going to do is try to dig through his numbers to see what sort of assumptions were made about operations, about ridership, and about costs for the improvement. And several of those lines, since you've seen the presentation, looked at streetcar extensions in different configurations. So we're using that as part of our input to the study. But what it gets down to is a fairly simple set of diagrams from the existing line along, from west to east again. Ashley has been discussed. Ashley has the same challenge of any alignment that turns off of the Franklin right-of-way along Whiting. That's a tight corner. It's as far as grade goes, it is a little bit of a hill. So there's a little bit of grade issues. For streetcar, 5 to 6% grade is the maximum grade, and that turn and drop to Tampa could get us close to that. I'm not sure, we haven't looked at it yet, but we're starting to. There's the constraint in right-of-way along the south end of Ashley, south of Kennedy. That's one of the narrowest parts of the downtown street network. So that specific location has the greatest potential to affect traffic flow downtown. On the north end, all these have CSX crossing issue. It's kind of a wash across the alternative, so it's not a plus or minus for any of them to get to MTC. We've got to make that move. We drew it for the sake of this discussion, turning east on Tyler to go to Marion and north. That could go different routes. However it does that, it's going to be in the grid and it's going to be the same amount of track. So it'll have different effects on traffic and circulation, but it's very similar in terms of costs. That's, of course, there's also a series of discussions about the potential changing of the ramp network along 275 to push traffic off of Ashley and get it to Tampa, which could open an Ashley extension north further, but that's something that's not on the books yet. I think we can think about that a little bit more and we'll try to find out more information. So again, Ashley, option one.
Question? I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah, I can pause by alternative.
I was just curious, for the proposal, do you know why it is suggested to go down to that far down south on Ashley, rather than maybe going up north a little bit further than turning? If the turn is not as sharp and you don't have the incline or decline?
You mean from where it ends now?
Yeah,
But isn't the problem the Esplanade?
The Esplanade represents a different additional challenge. So this avoids the Esplanade question and dodges it essentially. But there are many other possible alternatives. What we want to do is try to fix some numbers to these alternatives. But if we haven't started to lay these out yet, lay the tracks out on a more detailed map. So we could look at some different options when we move there. Do you have a specific thought in mind about what to do?
Well, I don't know. That southern part of Ashley, south of Kennedy, there's not really any reason to go down there as far as attractions that I'm aware of or anything. There's more potential ridership, I would think, if you moved it more east, a few blocks east, and then did a left turn and head west to connect to Ashland.
Okay.
So I definitely disagree with that. Again, if we're looking at attractions, that's one thing. If we're looking at building a commuter system, people are going to use. I think if you take 100 South Ashley, 100 North Tampa, 101 Kennedy, which fall in those 3 blocks north, that represents, I don't know, but I'll bet you it's, I bet you it's a significant percentage of traffic that you see entering downtown running through those 3 buildings. And I just know my morning commute when I come in on Kennedy, 2/3 of the cars turn and make that ridiculous circle around and around to get into those parking garages as it sits. And that's literally 2/3 of the cars making that turn and doing it. So I'd suggest that there's a pretty substantial population within those 3 blocks that, again, we're trying to, orient this towards commuters and the places people are already going, rather than the states where they're past trying to make them go, but not really the point where they want to go. I think that's probably a decent start. I mean, to jump on you, but
that's fine.
I see the population density and the worker density down there.
I guess it would depend on where those people are originating their travel from, too.
No, they don't get one.
No, this is exactly what I wanted you guys to see this.
And I need to get a map in front of me so I can make more careful on that. So I apologize for saying no problem. Would you like me to pause at each of these, or do you sort of both?
No, just keep talking and we'll wait.
Okay. The next one, well, I have to flash up here for a second, but we'll get back to it. This is looking at Tampa, Florida Care, which was one of the discussions that was back in the 2004 study. We looked at the potential, and this could also be looked at for other alternatives, so there's nothing particularly magical about how these are constructed right now. And we want to build the cost estimate so the pieces can be picked apart and stitched back together in different ways, so we'll provide those in parts. But what we do is show this one as a northbound on the existing line to underneath the crosstown, turning right either underneath the crosstown and hitting the gap between the columns and the crosstown, or turning right and crossing through to the north side of Doreen, contraflowing just for that block, and then taking a left and going up Florida. The geometry on Doreen is actually advantageous to that turn. It's not a true 90 degree, it's greater than 90, I don't know exactly what, 110 degree turn. So it makes the turning radius a little easier to make there. So we think we can get the radius up in that location. And then you can swing wide on Florida and head north, so that provides the potential for that. And then a straight shot of Florida, either, and it's not critical in thinking about which of these extensions is most promising. This could run either in mixed traffic in the right-hand lane, leaving the parking as it is now on the far right side of Florida, or it could run in the parking lane as an exclusive guideway.
Are you building a lot of streetcar systems? Are you seeing a lot of streetcar systems built today that run with traffic?
I tried to get a handle on that this morning, thinking about the questions that would come up. I think there's a fairly good mix right now.
Really?
Yeah. The folks that are thinking about longer routes are trying to get more exclusive guideway.
Right.
So they'll actually jump into an exclusive guideway for a section and then jump back out into mixed traffic. I'll find out more.
I'm just really curious because our driving behavior is so bad around here that and people take such crazy risks. You know, everybody's become a point-and-shoot driver, and streetcars are not nimble, especially the bigger they get. So it's just something that I'll be curious about your thoughts on.
Yeah, we'll address that more carefully. But the idea is that it gives you a straight shot of Florida with the preferred traffic flow. Although the signal timings don't really favor north-south over east-west travel now, it could be adjusted to allow for this trip to be a quick shot trip between stations. We show it now looping at Laurel and coming back south on Tampa, so you can imagine it on the far, as you're heading southbound on Tampa, the far right-hand lane, either displacing parking in an exclusive guideway or running next parking with stops on curb extensions at key locations. And then what we show here is the idea that it could, when it gets to Whiting, it would cross Whiting and then hug the north side of that ramp, the entrance ramp to the crosstown, cut back to Franklin, and then head down the east side of Franklin, so it would remain double track down to Dick Greco.
Interesting.
So the idea is this could be a complete double track system without any single, a pure loop to the existing station.
Pretty interesting.
The right of way is really tight. I mean, this would probably, unlike the other alternatives, this may require a little bit of right of way along the ramp. So the expressway right of way is one of the key questions on this one. We're going to try to dig up some survey information from the expressway to see what they actually have there so we can measure it. The next one is the straight shot of Franklin, which has been on the books for a long time. It's been the one that gets mapped most often, probably. This has the question about getting through the Esplanade, and then the possible implications on Franklin from to navigate as a dual track system to navigate the jogs along Franklin as you go up Franklin. It probably requires some streetscape reconstruction along Franklin to make that work. There is the city-owned portion of the Esplanade is at somewhere around 45 feet wide. And if this were a single track through the Esplanade, you only need 11 feet. So there's, in that space that the city controls in the Esplanade, there's physically room for it. Whether there's easements or other constraints on the use of that space is not something we've looked into yet, but we'll try to find out more about that.
Yeah, Bob, I know more about this, but the last time we talked to GTE, the road, the building, they weren't very sanguine about putting it through there, but they didn't say no, they just didn't say much.
2 owners ago, I just signed the estoppel certificates and just sold again. And we have a pedestrian easement, we don't have fee. So it's privately held, all of that land.
Just privately held?
Yes, there's a pedestrian easement, no fee.
That's it?
City.
Oh, it shows, I just pulled up the property tax records. It shows the city's number. It shows it's partly garage.
That to agree, you'd have to get them to agree to let you do it.
Okay.
I don't know if that's impossible, but as you'll find out, if you haven't already, a lot of strongly held feelings around there, it's not in terms of being an important microclimate, although a great failure as a commercial space, so. That's, the rest of Franklin Street, I feel really strongly would be a great place for a street park because there is a theory of urban redevelopment that said it's easier to recreate retail where it once was than to put it someplace new. And Franklin was the spine. And it's already more or less a pedestrian street, so. But you know.
And then it's another, it's an easy straight shot. The question about whether it can possibly loop at the end or terminate in some other way is something that can be open for further discussion, but it definitely gets where where the extension wants to go. The next option is to get over to Marion Transit Way. There's different ways to try to get from the existing line to Marion. We drew it from the existing terminus along Whiting. Just because we drew it doesn't mean that radius will work for a larger vehicle. So this is still lines on the map. This is what we're going to test. But that's a particularly tough location for a turn because it's a hard right to a narrow street space. There's vertical, it looks like, I believe that the vertical clearance is fine for streetcar if you can get it to make that turn. The turn is the challenge. If it was on the other side of Franklin, that turn could be a sweep and it would probably be able to accommodate it, but it's not, so that's a tough spot. And to try to get from the expressway north to that location, you still have to jog back and forth. So each one of those 90-degree turns slows the trip down. It creates potential for wheel squeal, for a rough turn. It's a little harder on the vehicles, a little harder on the track. So however we lay these out, we try to minimize the 90s, try to make more sweeping turns or straight shots. And then when you put all these together and you think about the extensions beyond the existing line, all these have the potential to go north beyond 275 to get into Tampa Heights, to get up to Palm, to loop around, or to head north on Florida, which is what the NPO study recently drew. They all have the potential to turn and head to the west to shoot at an alignment. It's 4 miles to the intermodal center from 4.1 or 2 miles from the intermodal center to Marion Transit Way. That's not that long of a stretch for streetcar by any means. And streetcar, even your existing cars, can operate at much higher speeds than they typically ever do. So there's a number of ways that could work. So this wouldn't preclude that from happening. Also, it wouldn't preclude a turn to the east to hit Ybor, either up to Palm and over, or along the possibility of going east on Zach or east on Cass to get to the Nucio Parkway and to get back to Ybor that way. Yeah.
Is there any way on the west side, if you went up actually to Tampa, how does it extend through 275? Is it viable to get through there or not?
You can get to it right along the water where Doyle Carlton Drive comes down now. So you can do it close to the water, or you have to get back all the way over to I'm thinking of
Well, Franklin and Ashland and Tampa overland it. No, Franklin.
Tampa is the furthest. Yeah, Tampa. You can get through in Tampa.
Okay. This is just strikes me that.
So you miss the whole cloverleaf condition there blocks it. Franklin goes under, but Tampa would be your furthest west.
It strikes me
The
as
furthest.
looking at this and love running along Ashland in the parks and
The debate, we've had a stakeholder meeting, and I did a brief presentation at the Tampa Downtown Partnership Transportation Committee, and that's been the debate, is whether this is really stitching together very closely stitching together the destinations on the water, or whether it should serve more of the core of downtown. And you can see the map, the blue circles are also, there's 2 levels of circle, an 1/8 of a mile and a 1/4 mile, so that's your, most directly affected and the properties that most directly benefit from a streetcar investment. And those lines extend north. So All of these lines serve the heart of downtown well. The Eastern Line, Marion, and even Florida are a little less beneficial to the western destinations. That's a 4-block stretch to the river from there. It's not far, but it's not ideal.
A lot of cities really like loops that are separated a few blocks because the coverage is huge. And so all its property owners will make investments based upon the proximity of the streetcar.
So I just have one more slide about where we're heading next. Is we're in the process of laying out these, either this exact set of alternatives or some slight modifications because we're looking at more closely with our engineers. We'll start to put cost numbers to those alternatives, so we have some working numbers. We'll also put cost to some of the changes that would have to occur to the existing line to introduce modern streetcar. We're trying to identify a short list of alternatives. I think that's going to be a little tricky because of the various objectives, but we'll present what we believe is our best professional opinion about, based on what we know, what looks most promising. But we will document the background of our assessment of the other alternatives. So all that detail will be available for planning purposes and for decision makers as they move forward thinking about it. We had one more meeting with our stakeholder group, which was a group that was folks from, obviously from HART, but from the city of Tampa, from the MPO, from the county, from FDOT, to review our initial analysis of the alternatives and get additional feedback on their concerns. And then we'll document that in a report and bring that back to HART.
And you're trying to do this pretty quickly?
We're trying to do it in the next month, so I have to work on scheduling very carefully to see if we can make that commitment, but I think we're in pretty good shape right now.
Good. Any other questions? Stephen, thank you so much for
Thank
your
you.
presentation. Thank you, Kevin, for doing that. I neglected to mention that Mike Suarez couldn't be here today. They took it away. Somebody wrote it before. Okay, we have information item, streetcar advertisement. Is that something you want to report on?
Yeah, this question came up in the marketing committee and actually came through Director Robinson, Director Marketing.
El Presidente Director?
Yeah, we'll give them all the titles. And this actually came from YCDCS, how much advertising revenue is actually being brought into the streetcar. So what we did is, the suggestion was also made to, let's go to the, when there was a contractor, Fran Solomon, and see from there what really happened. And the chart basically shows in fiscal year 10, and it's only part of there was a deficit actually of 25,000 because Fran Solomon was actually part of THS or part of the contract. Correct. And then in fiscal year 11, it was 13,000. Fiscal year 12, most of it was dealt with from Direct Media USA. A little bit came through a subcontractor of HDR. I don't recall her name, but there was practically no advertising that year until Direct Media USA came in. Then fiscal year 13, $58,000 came to THS, and through 2 months, still 2 months ago, Direct Media is already, THS has received $48,000, and they're on track to do $65,000.
Good. And is that in the package?
Yes.
Okay,
It's 5-1.
That's good. That's good. That's a good report. And I assume we can share that with the YCDC.
Yes, this is definitely what they would like to see.
Okay, we have information on compliance reports. If anyone's interested in asking a question. If not, is there any other business? Or new business? If not, I declare this meeting adjourned. Thank you all very much. Well, we should probably try to have a marketing committee meeting before